world's oldest Christian nation is going through spiritually challenging times, a widening rift between the church and the state. Interestingly enough, the state, laymen, accuse the church of violating church charter. What's going on behind the drawn curtains, the public only gets a partial view. Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you for the invitation.
Let us start with internal politics, church and state confrontation. What's going on in your estimation?
What we're seeing today is a fundamental break with the constitutional principle that the church should stay outside party politics. The Constitution of the Republic of Armenia and the law on the freedom of conscience and religious organizations draw a very clear boundary that the church is to provide spiritual guidance. However, it has no business in state governance whatsoever. It cannot engage in state governance whatsoever, being more specific. So, however, since 2020, basically after the second Nagorno-Karabakh war, we see that boundary being crossed over and over again. The head of the Armenian Church, Catholicos Gheorghe II, has been engaged in public political debate. He has urged the Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan to resign, which is an unprecedented act from a head of a spiritual organization. Moreover, some of the high-ranking clerics of the Armenian Church have shifted from sermons to political agitation. Two archbishops, particularly, have emerged as political activists, let me put it that way. One of them has urged the military to stage a coup. And when he was pressed on the matter, he reiterated his stance on the matter. The other one has started an opposition movement, and during the rallies he was calling the representatives of the government Turk-loving enemies or demons. I'm not sure these are expressions of faith.
According to the Constitution, the church and the state are separate, but church clearly entered political waters, finding a technical solution to avoid breaking the letter of the law, but not the spirit. Archbishop Bagrat Sirpazan froze his ministry before leading protests. The protests did not succeed due to a minor miscalculation. The Armenian leadership, with its strengths, weaknesses and quirks, is legitimate, elected by the majority. Arrests of high-standing church officials followed on legitimate charges. A sex scandal involving a high-standing church official was leaked into the public domain. No one has so far taken responsibility for the leak, which is a breach of personal life. In short, a settling of accounts inside seems to be happening. The government works over time not to break the democratic norm. The ecclesiastical saga still unfolding. Clearly, the church has taken on some of the functions of the opposition. They have been demonizing the government still. What do you make of the tools used against certain church members? Are these legitimate or even legal? Ethical?
Let's look at what the church members and some of the high-ranking church members doing to earn that kind of treatment from the government, as you have put it. So I think that the church has been politicized, and it has taken on more distinctly foreign dimension, let me put it that way. I'm sure you have noted that for yourself as well. The Catholicos Gheorghe II has received high-profile honors from the head of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, as well as some high-profile honors from the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill. Now, question arises here, a legitimate question. Why would the head of the Armenian Church receive high-profile honors from the head of a country that has never really concealed its intention to subjugate Armenia to its will? Or, for that matter, it has never really considered Armenia to be a full-blown sovereign state, more like a quasi-state, which is, by the way, the case with Ukraine as well, or with the rest of the post-Soviet countries.
Are you hinting an external trace?
That's what I'm doing. So let's see what's happening next. One of the archbishops, Bagrat Galstanyan, during one of his public interviews, he has announced that he's in touch with some foreign powerful centers. I'm sure you remember this. And he has hinted that unless Armenia is back to the Russian orbit, and if Armenia doesn't reject the Western mediation, or if we do not stop our efforts of normalization with Azerbaijan and Turkey, basically, we're going to lose sovereignty. This is the same messages that we have seen coming from some Russian experts, as well as some Russian politicians, members of parliament, and the Armenian institutional opposition. A bloc that is very well identified with Russian interests in Armenia. Now we see that church, the Armenian church, the Russian rhetoric on the matter, and the institutional opposition in Armenia align on this matter. So let me put it this way. When religious authority is used to legitimize a foreign geopolitical agenda, the church, in this case, ceases to be a neutral moral force, and it becomes an instrument of foreign intervention.
Do you justify the tools that the government is using to basically demoralize certain church members?
Okay, having said all of whatever I have said and stressed, it's my belief that in this case the government has not only the right but the obligation to protect the constitution. And while protecting the religious freedoms, it has to ensure that the spiritual freedom is not exploited for political subversion.
Two parallel pictures come to the mind while the Armenian Prime Minister, as a token of solidarity, participates in the liturgy of an outspoken priest. The leader of Russia awards Archbishop Yerevan Nersisyan, head of the Armenian Apostolic Church's Russian and New Nakhchivan diocese, with the Order of Alexander Nevsky. Is the church playing politics while the state is trying to bring it back on the spiritual track? It's the pre-election year. What's your prediction about how high the temperature will still go? The internal frictions, how are the internal frictions going to affect the efficacy of foreign policy as well?
Before any major elections, the temperatures naturally go high and the rhetoric gets harsher. So the 2026 elections are not going to be any different in this sense. But in Armenia's case, I think we're going to see something more serious, a concerted effort from external actors and their internal proxies to destabilize the political field ahead of the votes.
And you see the church as part of the hybrid war that is being launched against Armenia in the pre-election year. Am I correct in my judgment?
I totally do. And this time it's not just about the internal politics. Church has become one of the instruments, let me put it that way. And because this time it's not just about the internal politics or the agendas of opposition and the governing party, it's more about the influence that Russia is going to have following the elections, based on the results that the elections are going to yield. Now, let's look at the broader regional context. Despite their heavy interference and the hybrid operations, the Russian proxies have lost the elections in Moldova. And this makes Armenia even more important, strategically important for Russia. So we're going to see, I'm sure that we're going to see some real hybrid efforts to shape the outcomes of the election in the liking of Russia. And these efforts are not going to be just political campaigning, more like some hybrid tools like disinformation, economic pressure, or attempts to fracture public trust in the government and their foreign policy course. So we already see some early signs of this, like the coming of the Russian oligarch of Armenian descent, Samvel Karapetyan, to Armenia, and his sudden announcement, I would say, that he's going to enter Armenian politics, and his harsh critique of the turning away of Armenia from Russia, as he put it, or rather trusting with mediation the West. And this coincides with some serious rise in information manipulation, such as creation of doppelganger websites that mimic some Western media outlets and disseminate fake news regarding the prime minister, some members of his government, his family members, as well as some amplification of anti-Western and anti-normalization rhetoric.
Is there a prognosis what the next parliament will look like, or does this also depend on the intervention or the lack from external forces?
I think it depends on several factors. At this stage, the political landscape of the Republic of Armenia has not changed much. By saying this, I mean that we're going to see primarily the same confrontation that we have seen during the last elections, which is on one side the current government with its peace-building efforts, the connectivity rhetoric, strengthening the sovereignty of Armenia through opening the regional routes and normalization of relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan, etc., etc. And then on the other side, we have the institutional opposition, which has already announced that it's going to halt the peace process with Azerbaijan and it's not going to pursue the border opening with Turkey. Some of its members have gone so far as announcing that they prefer Armenia to see as part of the Russian Federation at some point. It's much preferable for them. So the outcome of the next parliamentary elections, I think, is going to hinge on whether the current government can deliver some tangible results on some very important
like the
points.
Signing of a peace agreement?
One of them, I think, is going to be the demarcation and delimitation process, especially on those strips of the Armenian border that is occupied by Azerbaijani forces. This is going to show that diplomacy is also capable of delivering some tangible security results. The other one, I think, is going to be the deblocking of the regional routes, because it's going to deliver some economic relief for most of our regions. Also, it's going to show that maybe I do, but I think that at least some results on at least one of these fronts is going to convince the public of the Republic of Armenia that peace building is real and diplomacy is a very efficient tool in terms of delivering some tangible results in terms of the security as well. So if government can deliver some tangible results in those problems that are important to the Armenian population and the Armenian citizen, I think that because they're going to ask their vote to pursue their current foreign policy course. So if they can convince the Armenian public that they're going to be efficient in this sense, I think that Armenian public will be able to deliver that vote. I think that actually these elections are going to be kind of like a referendum on two visions for Armenia's future. One of them is peace building, reformist Armenia, who is connected with the rest of the regional players, open for the world. And the other one is more like a pro-Russian state, drawn back into the state that we were back in before the 18th revolution. More dependent on Russia and not really independent in this sense.
Thank you one more time.
Thank you for the invite.
While it's more on to wash your dirty political linen in public, the rational approach is to tone down the church-state dialogue or perhaps the absence of it. But it's the pre-election year. Will the sides take a step back? With so many internal and external challenges to face, may God keep an eye on this small nation.